Stay ahead of the curve this election season with Cayman Election Pulse, your top source for real-time election updates and insights. Dive into in-depth candidate profiles and know exactly who's running and what they stand for. Catch all the breaking news and updates on debates, events, and any last-minute changes. With our exclusive interviews and analysis, you'll get expert opinions and a deep dive into the pressing issues. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep your finger on the pulse of the Cayman elections.
All right, so picture this. Imagine a country that gets like a perfect credit score, but then they find out that their like combined finances are a total disaster.
Yeah.
That's kind of the situation going on over in the Cayman Islands.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Individual government departments are doing great.
Yeah.
Their financial reports are top-notch, but when you look at the overall picture, it's a
little more complicated.
It's a little more complicated than that, yeah.
Yeah.
So you sent us this really interesting transcript from the Cayman Islands Parliament's Public Accounts Committee meeting.
Okay.
It was from March 14th, 2024.
Right.
They were going through and kind of like picking apart the Auditor General's report on the government's finances for 2022.
Gotcha.
And things get a little interesting.
I bet they do.
Yeah. So in this deep dive, we're going to try to figure out why this discrepancy exists.
Yeah.
Why are individual departments doing so well?
Right.
But the overall picture is a little bit messy. What are some of the biggest obstacles they're facing? And then what does this all mean for the future of the islands?
Yeah. So essentially what we're looking at here is this interesting contrast of individual government bodies.
Right.
Really kind of like excelling at financial reporting. And then on the flip side, you have the overall picture that needs, let's just say, a bit more work.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of work, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's start with some good news.
Okay.
The Auditor General gave like almost all of the individual government entities a clean bill of health.
Yeah.
A clean audit opinion basically means their books are in order.
Right, exactly. Their financial statements are accurate, they're reliable, and they adhere to all the necessary accounting standards.
So that's impressive, right?
Yeah, it is actually, and it reflects years of continuous improvement in financial reporting at that level.
Okay, so then where does the messy part come in?
So the messy part emerges when you start to look at the consolidated accounts,
Okay.
which basically represents the financial picture of the entire public sector.
The whole enchilada.
Exactly, and that's where the story takes a different turn.
Okay.
For the past 3 years, those consolidated accounts have actually received an adverse audit opinion.
An adverse audit opinion.
An adverse audit opinion.
What does that actually mean?
So in simple terms, it's the worst possible rating a government can receive when it comes to its financial statements.
Oh, wow.
You can think of it as a giant red flag.
Gotcha.
It essentially means that the Auditor General has really serious concerns about the accuracy and the completeness of the financial statements.
So this isn't just like an accounting headache?
No, it's much bigger than that.
All right.
A rating like this could potentially impact their ability to borrow money, to fund essential services, and even maintain a good credit rating.
Right.
And all of these things could actually have a trickle-down effect on every citizen of the Cayman Islands.
Wow, so this is a lot more serious than I initially realized.
It is.
So what exactly is causing this disconnect? You have these individual entities that are doing great, but then collectively it's a struggle.
Well, there are a few key factors at play here.
Okay.
A major culprit is a massive liability for post-retirement healthcare costs.
Okay.
We're talking about a whopping $2.3 billion.
$2.3 billion.
It's billion dollars.
Wow.
And the problem is this isn't being properly disclosed on the main financial statements.
Wait, so this huge liability is just like missing from their reports?
Essentially, yes.
Really?
They know this bill is eventually coming due, but they aren't fully acknowledging it in their current financial reporting.
Why would they do that?
It all boils down to politics, really.
I see.
The financial secretary himself admitted during the Public Accounts Committee meeting that including this liability could technically wipe out their net assets.
Oh, wow.
And that would then put them in violation of their own fiscal responsibility rules.
So they're worried about how it looks.
Exactly. They're concerned about the optics, even though the liability exists, whether or not they choose to acknowledge it in their reports.
So it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
But like you said, a $2.3 billion debt doesn't just magically disappear.
Exactly. And this is where that adverse audit opinion really comes into play.
Okay.
It raises serious questions about their transparency and their ability to manage public funds effectively.
So we have this like elephant in the room, this massive hidden liability.
Yeah.
What else is contributing to these consolidated account issues?
Well, in addition to that massive liability, there's also a significant backlog of audits for some pretty key government entities.
Okay.
We're talking about the Ministry of Health and the Cayman Islands Airport Authority.
And how far behind are they on those?
Both of those entities are a whopping 5 years behind on their audits.
5 years.
5 years.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's a pretty shocking figure.
What's the impact of letting those audits just sit there for that long?
Well, imagine not knowing how your tax dollars are being spent for 5 years.
Yeah.
That's the reality that the Cayman Islands are facing right now.
Mm.
And this lack of accountability can really erode public trust and make it difficult for them to make informed decisions about spending and resource allocation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's interesting because the Accountant General actually suggested during the meeting that they might have to disclaim those past 5 years.
Disclaim?
Essentially hit the reset button and just focus on getting those entities current.
Wow, that's a pretty drastic measure.
It is, but it kind of highlights the severity of the situation.
So we have this massive undisclosed liability and then this huge backlog of audits. Anything else we need to know?
Well, it seems like procurement, how the government buys goods and services, is another area where there are some concerns.
Yeah.
So the Public Accounts Committee raised questions about several instances where government bodies didn't follow the proper rules for procurement.
Which is a problem
Well,
because...
it raises questions about whether they're getting the best value for money.
Right, of course.
Right. And that ultimately impacts you, the taxpayer.
Yeah, for sure.
So one example that stood out to me involved the Ministry of Education.
Okay.
When they moved to a larger campus, they simply extended their existing janitorial contract without going through a new procurement process.
So they just kept the same contract even though their needs had changed.
Exactly, which is technically a violation of the procurement rules.
So it's not just about like dotting the I's and crossing the T's. It's about making sure they're spending public funds responsibly.
Precisely every dollar counts, and it's their responsibility to ensure that those dollars are being used wisely.
For sure.
And then there's one more layer to all of this that we need to consider.
Okay.
The Cayman Islands are facing the added challenge of implementing new international accounting standards.
Yeah, I remember that was mentioned in the transcript. It
Well-
sounded like it's going to be pretty complicated.
Yeah, it's definitely going to add another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation.
Right.
So these new standards, known as IPSAS, are designed to make financial reporting more transparent and comparable globally.
And for a major financial center like the Cayman Islands, keeping up with those global norms is essential.
Absolutely. It's crucial for maintaining their reputation and attracting business.
So what's the biggest obstacle for them in actually implementing these new standards?
Well, based on what we've gathered, it seems like training is a major concern.
Makes sense.
It's a steep learning curve for everyone involved.
Especially with everything else on their plate, the backlogged audits, the massive undisclosed liability.
Exactly. It's a lot to juggle, but these new standards are more than just a technical change.
Okay.
It's really a fundamental shift in how they account for their assets, their liabilities, and their overall financial performance.
So it's really about changing the way they think about managing public funds.
Precisely. It's a change in philosophy.
Gotcha.
And that requires buy-in, not just from those at the top, but from everyone involved in the financial reporting process.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. A hidden healthcare liability, backlogged audits, procurement hiccups,
Yeah.
and these new accounting standards looming on the horizon.
Yeah.
It kind of paints a pretty challenging picture for the future of the Cayman Islands.
Yeah, it does. They're at a real crossroads.
Yeah.
You know, they've proven they can achieve really high standards of financial reporting at the individual entity level.
Right.
But now replicating that success at the consolidated level, that's the real challenge.
And it's a challenge with very real consequences for the people of the Cayman Islands.
Right.
Before we get into those consequences, let's take a quick pause.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll explore the different paths the Cayman Islands can take to try to address these challenges, and we'll talk about what it all means for the future of this island nation.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll be right back.
Stay ahead of the curve this election season with Cayman Election Pulse, your top source for real-time election updates and insights. Dive into in-depth candidate profiles and know exactly who's running and what they stand for. Catch all the breaking news and updates on debates, events, and any last-minute changes. With our exclusive interviews and analysis, you'll get expert opinions and a deep dive into the pressing issues. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep your finger on the pulse of the Cayman elections.